Let us begin with our fifth part of our Chapter 10 STAAR review. Chapter 10, the Roaring Twenties. This is the STAAR video, the STAAR PowerPoint, and our fifth video. So let us begin. The learning objectives, pretty simple stuff. How do new values encourage greater openness and self-expression? And so what we're going to be looking at are a couple things as I wait for my drawing mode to kick in. It's been kind of slow this morning. We're looking at new values, greater openness and self-expression. We'll be looking at flappers and women's roles and how they changed, different forms of music blended together. Those crazy kids. Not sure what that means, but we'll find out. And then, of course, the Harlem Renaissance. We'll be looking at all those things over the course of the next video, this video, and probably one other. We'll probably take two more videos, this one and another one, to finish it up. Let's look at the emergence of these new values. Traditional values had existed in America before the 1920s. Okay, we're looking at traditional values that had existed before the 1920s. Were found to be old and outdated. Now, before you start to cry a tear over them, keep in mind that every generation, every new generation, teenagers, young 20-year-olds, much like yourselves, believe that their parents and grandparents' methods of doing things were old and outdated and of very little value now, whether it be in clothing, music. It doesn't really matter. This is nothing new. The Victorian era that we had been leaving, Victorian era for our purposes, basically dealing with the morals and the values and the dress of women for our chapter we're discussing now. Women, again, dressed very chaste. They had skirts down to their ankles, sleeves to their wrists, and collars up to their chins. Did not dance and drink and smoke in public. Those are the older, the traditional values that were found to be old and outdated. Instead, the 1920s led to a newer, more modern value which encouraged greater openness and self-expression. Flappers, for example, when we're talking about women. We had changes in music, art, literature, and sexuality. These are all changes in music, art, literature, and sexuality that provided the opportunity for expression of these freedoms. Now, again, this is not just with women, though a good chunk of this, for example, the sexuality, is really referring to women. But as far as the music, the art, the literature, we're probably talking about the black community, hence the Harlem Renaissance. So we're looking for a modern values which encourage greater openness and self-expression. And that's what we'll be looking at in this video and probably the next one as well. Let's take a few moments to look at some of the changing roles of women. And there's a couple of images there of Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony is the one in the upper right-hand corner, which would be right there. And there is Elizabeth Stanton right there. These women worked for women's suffrage, and we have some images down here, political cartoon of the day, depicting that. So the changing roles of women. Women had demonstrated their abilities during World War I. We had seen and we've discussed how women stepped up, took the place of their husband, their father, their brother, in the factories and the fields, producing the goods necessary to win the war. A booming economy created new jobs, and more women began working outside the home than ever before. More women working outside the home ever before as a result of World War I. When the war ended, many women, not all, and not a plurality, not more than half, but a good number of women decided to stay in the workforce because of the advantages they found it gave them. In addition, women wanted equality with men in all areas. For example, the right to vote, which takes us to the 19th Amendment, which gave women suffrage, the right to vote, but it gave them that right universally. Prior to the 19th Amendment, some women were allowed to vote in certain elections. Most of that was out west of the Mississippi, which would include Texas. Many women were allowed to vote. Many women were allowed to vote in many elections. In some cases, probably even all elections. But it wasn't universal. So women wanted universal suffrage where they could vote in any election, and the 19th Amendment gave that to them. So what are we seeing here? We are seeing the changing roles of women, an economy that took off after World War I. More women worked outside the home than ever before, partially due to the efforts they had put in during World War I. They wanted universal suffrage, and the 19th Amendment provided that for them. Let's go to our next slide. We are still continuing with the changing roles of women. In the upper right-hand corner, we have some flappers, and there is an image of that right there. We're looking at flappers came to symbolize the new freedoms that many women felt during the 1920s, and here we have the traditional look of a flapper. We have short skirts, at least short by their standards, above the knee, shorter hair, bobbed hair, shoulders often are bare, wearing jewelry. Now, if we could see them closely, which we cannot really do, probably see most of them are wearing makeup. They're dancing, they're drinking, smoking in public, and those women who did those kind of things were referred to as flappers. So, what we have here is a new independent attitude began to appear among women, particularly the young urban women. Urban, of course, referring to cities. So, young women in large cities, New York, for example, California, Los Angeles, and you can go to Boston, Philadelphia, Chicago, any of those big cities, who started to dress and behave like that, became known as flappers. Okay, these flappers, get that out of the way so we can see this a little more clearly. These flappers took more risks. Okay, they took risks. They cut their hair short. They wore short skirts, smoked and drank in public, danced. Oh my God! Chewed gum. Now, what's not mentioned here, they probably well, no, it's mentioned there. Smoked. So we have cut their hair, wore short skirts, smoked, drank, danced in public, and even chewed gum. Now, I'm not sure which one is the worst to many people. Was it the chewing gum? Was it the drinking? Was it the dancing? The short skirts? I'm not really sure. But women who did those things, and again, here we have prototypical look of a flapper. Women in big cities, young women who did these things were often referred to as flappers. Women of today, such as the young women in class, the female teachers here on campus, owe a great deal to these flappers who helped women gain their independent spirit. And again, not only that, I mean, independence is nice, but these women opened doors for women of today, my wife, my two daughters included, opened doors for women today to hold positions in politics, big business, on and on and on. So the women today owe those women a great deal. And let's look at our next slide. It's a STAAR practice test question. And we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's a pretty simple one. So we have STAAR practice question number 1. Compare the images below and answer the question. Which image shows the changing roles of women as women began to experiment with newfound freedoms during the 1920s? Was it image A or image B? Image A, of course, there on the left, image B on the right, and of course the answer is image B. We see the traditional role of women in image A, the Victorian style of dress, and then in image B we see a young lady, short skirt, short hair, stand in front of a car, probably going to drive the car away. All things which were vastly different due to the changing morals of the time. Let's go to our next slide. Tin Pan Alley. Tin Pan Alley was in New York, and we'll take a look at some of the things that are happening here. Tin Pan Alley, okay. Following the Civil War, thousands of pianos were sold, As a result, the sale of sheet music exploded. Okay, I mean, people are becoming a little more literate in music, which is a good thing. Okay, about 1910, New York City became the music publishing capital of the country, possibly even the world. So, we are selling lots of pianos, sheet music, and New York is the music publishing capital. Tin Pan Alley, which is a section of New York, was the center of this activity. Tin Pan Alley was the center of all this activity in music publishing. Songwriting and musical ideas mixed together to form a unique brand of American music. So, Americans are experimenting with music. They're taking different genres of music, mixing together, and forming a brand new, or forming brand new forms, creating new forms of American music. Let's move on to our next slide. We're going to continue with Tin Pan Alley. We're going to look at a couple of things here. Now, unfortunately, this is a copy of the original, and so clicking on these things as it says to do over here is not going to take us to them. I've already played for you some of the music of the era, and I will play some of these individuals and their music a little bit later on. What we have here is a little bit of a look at a vaudeville, and I have some stuff I'll show you if I haven't shown it to you already. So I cannot show you those things here, but I will show them to you separately. Okay, let's get back to this Tin Pan Alley. Publishers found that average people bought sheet music for popular tunes so they could play the music at home. So people were buying more and more of the sheet music, and here's an example of some of the sheet music up here. Anyone who's familiar with music, whether it be in the orchestra or the band, or I suppose any other number of areas, are familiar with what sheet music looks like, and you can buy this all over the place. Okay, and there are a couple of stores dedicated to music and musicians, musical instruments here in the Valley, where you can find this in pretty much any song ever written. You can find it on sheet music if you look hard enough. Okay, and so that is why New York became the capital of the publishing, because there are more and more people who were looking for this type of entertainment. Now, again, why were they able to do this? Well, again, as we have discussed, after World War I, there was a great deal of economic prosperity. People were working fewer hours thanks to a 40-hour work week, but they were making more money because they're being paid more per hour. They had a lot more free time. They had a lot more free money that they could spend that they did not have to spend upon buying food and clothing and those types of things. And so a lot of it was spent on entertainment. And what was one of those forms of entertainment? Playing music at home. Okay. Another form of entertainment of the era was vaudeville. Vaudeville became the most popular form of entertainment at that time, and it shows had a great need for music. Now, I'll show you some vaudeville video, again, if I have not already done so by the time we see this. Vaudeville is kind of difficult to explain. Essentially, you would have entertainers on stage who would act, dance, sing, juggle. There was comedy, there was serious stuff, maybe Shakespearean plays, on and on and on. We often think of vaudeville, at least I think of vaudeville, I think of kind of a silliness. A guy in a unicycle juggling tennis balls while people are throwing pies at him, or a pie in the face. Here you have a distinguished looking man walking on stage and beginning to recite a soliloquy from Shakespeare. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is nobler, blah, blah, blah. In the middle of it, guy walks up and pops him in the face with a pie. That's vaudeville. And again, I will show you some examples of that if I have not already done so. Okay, let's get back to this. Musicians of the era like Scott Joplin, Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, and George Gershwin. And here are, let me erase that. There we go. Here's what they look like. Joplin Berlin, Cole Porter, and Gershwin. And I'll play you some of their music if I have not already done so, so you get an idea. And I'll show you some images of vaudeville. My favorite from the vaudeville era would be Abbott and Costello. And if I haven't shown you some of their stuff, I will. Now, of course, it wasn't recorded while they were on vaudeville, but they were vaudeville musicians, vaudeville entertainers, who went on and survived for several decades. And from vaudeville, they would go to radio. From radio, they would go to motion pictures. Motion pictures, they would go to TV. And of course, TV didn't come around to the early 50s. So if you were in vaudeville in the 20s and you had a lengthy enough career, you may last until the 50s, where you would then get on TV. And people like Abbott and Costello, Jack Benny, I could go on and on. These are some of the greats in entertainment history. And again, I will show you some of that stuff as we proceed. Let's move on. We have a couple more slides I want to cover before we finish up with this video. Youth in the Lost Generation. Now, the Lost Generation, of course, refers to the writers. We've talked about them. Scott Fitzgerald, for example, how the writers, many of the men who had covered World War I, became somewhat disillusioned with the world. And so as the war ended, they stayed in Europe, in Paris, more times than not. And they wrote about things that expressed their disillusionment. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby. And we've talked about that previously. I don't see a need to go back and revisit it, but that's just an example. The youth of the period of time were kind of strange. And here's a couple of examples of things right here. During the 1920s, young adults, the youth of America, participated in all kinds of zany, crazy, weird fads like flagpole sitting, right over here, and dance marathons, right in here. And for those of you who cannot grasp the obvious, a person who is a flagpole sitter is a person who sits on a flagpole. Why? That's a darn good question. It sort of became the thing that everybody did. It kind of fad. Every generation has these dumb things that they do, fads, flagpole sitting. In the 40s and 50s, it was swallowing live goldfish on college campuses. Don't ask me why. In the late 50s, early 60s, stuffing people in a phone booth. The kind of thing that Superman used to jump into, change, and then Clark Kent run into and jump out of Superman, that kind of stuff, which we don't have anymore. In the 70s, it was bell-bottom pants and these kind of wild printed shirts, beads, longer hair. In the 80s, it was disco and the white suit, that kind of stuff. And so in this era, we're looking at some goofy stuff, dance marathons, essentially. You and a partner would dance for hours upon end. In some cases 24, 36 hours, and the winner would be given some money to earn a prize. Flagpole sitting is just what it says. Okay. Dances like the Charleston became wildly popular. New words came into use. Again, we do the same thing. Every generation has a different vocabulary. And if you compare our vocabulary, your vocabulary, the vocabulary of the youth of today to the vocabulary of the youth of the 20s, you'll find a lot of differences. Bootlegging, we've already talked about. Speakeasies, we've talked about. A flat tire is a dull, boring person. Don't even get me started on that one. A gam is a girl's leg. Jake is okay, as in he's Jake with me. He's okay with me. And of course, gam, girl's legs. I mean, you see the gams on that girl? Or you see the gams on that one? Referring to her legs. Spifflicated. Yeah, I don't know about that. But spifflicated means that you are drunk. And a white cow is a vanilla milkshake. That actually kind of makes some sense. Anyway, those are some of the terms that were used by the youth of America at that time. Okay, let's move on. I think I have one or two more slides I want to cover before we finish up this particular video. And so while I'm waiting for this to load up, we're looking at the youth of and the lost generation, same as before. A new group of writers known as the lost generation. We've talked about them already a little bit. Rejected, and I think this is the key word, rejected the desire for material wealth. Now again, artists, writers, musicians, painters, poets, a lot of them, particularly writers and painters, often are not recognized within their own lifetime or not recognized early in their career, and they don't really gain a lot of monetary success until later in their career or until they die. And so the lost generation was a group of writers, as I mentioned earlier, who were disillusioned with the world as a result of World War I, and they hung out in the bars, the sidewalk cafes of Paris, discussed some of the things that they didn't like, and then wrote about it. For example, we have over here Ernest Hemingway wrote about experiences, his own experiences in World War I. He was an ambulance driver during World War I in his book, A Farewell to Arms. Talking about the disillusionment, the chaos, the death of World War I. Sinclair Lewis ridiculed the narrowness and hypocrisy of American life in his book, Mean Street. And of course, F. Scott Fitzgerald, we talked about him already, The Great Gatsby. These were part of the lost generation. These writers believed that they did not fit the patterns of everyday life after the horrors of World War I. Again, let me restate that. These writers believe that they did not fit, the writers, did not fit into the everyday patterns of life because of the horrors of World War I that they had personally observed. Our final bullet, the lost generation felt America had become overly materialistic and lacked spirituality. Now again, supposedly, let's go back to this, the lost generation rejected the desire for material wealth. They did not, these puppies right here, did not necessarily write to make money, though if they got paid, I'm sure they didn't mind. They believed that America had become too materialistic, that we're too wrapped up on the acquisition of things, and that we lack spirituality. Notice it does not say religion or faith. Those are different things. The spirituality they're referring to is sort of a generosity of the soul, an openness of the soul, the openness to new things. And so that, in a nutshell, is a lost generation. They believe that much of their audience, American readers, lacked that spirituality that they had acquired as a result of seeing the horrors of war. Okay. We're going to stop it right here. We have gotten to a point where I'm pretty happy. We've taken a little over 23 minutes, and we finish our up this PowerPoint, hopefully, with our last video. But at the moment, I'm happy to stop here. So this has been the STAAR Part 5 video, which of course covers Chapter 10.